Webhooks give you real-time access into your own data for resend, whether that's anything around emails or contacts or domains. Today, I want to walk you through how to set up a webhook with special attention given to verifying the webhook, and we'll talk through why that's important. You ready? Let's go. First things first, I've got a stock Next.js project here, and the first thing I need to do is install resend. So npm I resend, that should get that all installed. And once it's installed, you know we'll need an API key. So let's grab that in the resend dashboard. All right, here I am in the resend dashboard. I'll create a new API key. Let's just name this something like webhooks example, and I'll go ahead and hit add. We're going to take this key and add it to a .env.local file within our project. So here I'll copy this. Let's jump back over to the project, and then I'm going to create a .env.local file. Now you can name this whatever you want, but we typically recommend resend API key. So resend API key like that, and then I'll go ahead and paste this in. Obviously, you should not share this with anyone else, and I will delete this before you see the video. Okay, so we've got the API key set up. Now we need to actually set up the webhook. Now in Next.js here, I can create a new folder. We'll call this API. And then inside here, let's create another one. We'll call this webhook. By the way, you can actually do this kind of in one flow if you just say webhook and then route.ts. So if you create a new file, it'll actually kind of subdivide and create those folders for you as you go in Cursor or VS Code. All right, first thing I'm going to do here is paste in this stock kind of post route. All we're going to do is grab the payload and do something off the payload. Now you'll notice here I'm using the .text. That will be important in a second, but now we actually have a post route, and that's all we need to set up a webhook. Now, in order for us to actually use this webhook in resend, I need a publicly addressable URL, and localhost is just not that. So you can do a couple of things. You can push this to production and then test it, but obviously that's not super easy to work with. So what we're going to do is set up ngrok to tunnel out to a public route that I can then use as my webhook within resend. Now for ngrok to work, I still need my local dev server running, so let's get that up and running. And then you can just install ngrok, and you just need a free account. The instructions are literally 2 steps, and you can find that on their website. Once you've got that, you can use ngrok like this, and then just point it to whatever your URL is. In this case, it's localhost 3000, which means that's what it should be here. Now it will actually give you a forwarding address like this. So I want to copy this, and we'll use this inside of resend. All right, so back in resend, we'll click add webhook, and I can just add that webhook, except I need to use my route. In this case, it would be API, and then I had it underneath webhooks, I think, like that. I guess we'll see in a second. All right, then let's go ahead and add all event types just so we can capture any events, and I'll click add. Now you can handle this in a bunch of different ways. You can have webhooks that just listen to certain types of events and other webhooks that listen to others. But let's check to make sure that this is all working properly. So the first thing to do is to make sure I actually spelled it correctly, and I have an API webhook here. So now let's check to make sure I added the right one in resend. And no, I did webhooks, but this is fine because it gives us a chance to edit the endpoint, which is what you're going to need to do if you go ahead and use this in production. Once you're done testing it locally here, you're going to want to replace this ngrok domain with a custom domain, whatever your project lives at. All right, so it's a good practice to kind of know how to update that. All right, and now it should be pointing to the right route. All right, so with that said, we're going to just do something that I know will be captured. Since we said all events, we could just use a created contact or deleted contact. So I'll go to my audience. Let's go ahead and delete this one right here, and I'll delete it like this, which should be captured in a webhook event. Now again, I'm tunneling from my local host out to ngrok, and that publicly addressable URL is what resend is sending these payloads to. So I'll jump back to the webhooks here. We'll click on here, and we should see an event that comes through. And look at this, we get all this response body back. It's obviously just a bunch of text because that's how we captured it. But I do know that I'm actually getting a payload, and it looks just like this. Now we've got full documentation about each individual payload, all the body params. So if you're ever not sure how those look, you should be able to look those up in our docs. In fact, let me show you that right now. If I jump over to our docs, you can see that I can go to webhook events, and down here I've got individual webhook events for each item. In that case, we did contact.deleted. So we've got an example right here along with typing for all the body parameters. So if you ever have any questions, go ahead and check out our docs. All right, so with that said, let's talk about verifying webhooks. So why would you need to verify a webhook? Well, by default, it's just a post route, and so you need to have some kind of control over who can send requests to that post route. Now, what we're going to do is use a signing secret from resend to check that the actual post payload came from resend. So let's use kind of a dumb example. Let's say that we were to check inside here, like if something happened, whatever. All right. So in this case, I'll just say we're going to console.log, receive webhook payload, and then paste it out. Now, I could hit this from any route, and I know what route I need because I just have to post to this endpoint. All right, so here's our dumb post endpoint. We're just going to post to that endpoint right here, and I'll say the message is hacked. So when I send this along, now I don't have any protection over that individual endpoint. And so you can see how I actually get this console logged hacked. Now, obviously this isn't super helpful because I'm just console logging it, but you can see how anybody can basically post. Now, if you're doing more complex flows, like let's say you're receiving data and then deciding to delete that contact from your database, you want to make sure that that post is coming from Resend. So here's where the signing secret comes in. Back in Resend here, I'll just copy this signing secret and I want to add this as well to my .env file. So I'll add a new variable called Resend Webhook secret, and then I'll paste that in there. Now, we've yet to actually use Resend in the project, so we should probably do that next. All right, let's get rid of our little fake hacked right here. And then up top here, I want to go ahead and pull in Resend and then instantiate this with our Resend API key. Now, when any of my tracked events happen, it should post to this endpoint and send along a payload. So now what I want to do is verify that payload. Now, I mentioned earlier that we've used request.text. This is because if you try to parse the JSON, the signature is very sensitive to any kind of manipulation. So you want to use just the plain text here that we're getting from the request. All right, so first thing I need to do is make sure that there's a few headers there. We're going to look for the ID, the timestamp, and the signature. Now, all of these headers should exist on the payload that Resend sends, and they'll always be there. So these are the things I can check against. Now, if for whatever reason they're not there, let's go ahead and just return a next response here saying missing headers with a status of 400. So the last thing to do is to verify this request. We'll use these few headers we got along with the secret, and we'll use the Node SDK that has this functionality built in. All right, so just below our little if clause there, let's paste this in. We're just going to use resend.webhooks verify. This is that functionality built straight in. We'll pass along this plaintext payload, the 3 headers, and then our webhook secret, which lives in our .env file. Now, this will either throw an error if the webhook is invalid, or it will return to us the full payload. So what we're going to do is actually take the result here and spread this in. So just like that, we've updated our endpoint to handle requests only from Resend. Now let's test it. So I'll come over here, we'll add a new contact. We'll just do it manually here. And I'll use my own email address, chris@resend.com. And once I add this, again, I'm watching for all these events. In this case, contact.created. I should see it in one of my webhooks over here. So I'll come back over this way. Just now, webhooks are created, and look at this, status 200. So that means it verified properly. And you can see everything else right here. Now, if I were to mess up any of those details, we'll see that it actually should fail. So let's do that now. So back in the call, I'm going to change this ID. We'll do like 123, which obviously is not the right one. And then let's delete that contact and see if this fails validation. So I'll come over here, we'll delete the contact like this, and it should fail that validation and return to me an error. So again, I'll come to the webhooks, we'll click inside here, and I should see that there's a contact deleted event. Let me refresh. It's attempting, and you'll see that it's getting back. This event detail is no longer available. Event data is typically retained for 90 days. All right, so it's actually failing the verification process, and now I actually get the 500. Okay, so just like that, you can see how it's telling me this didn't match the signature found, which means if I post to this or somebody else tries to kind of hack this endpoint, it won't work because it doesn't pass verification. So what would you do with a webhook like this? Well, let's head back over to the event itself. And now that I know that I've got this result, then I can just do a check off of this. So for instance, I could do something like if result dot, and then notice I've got these different types that I could do a check off of. So I can say, let's first of all handle something like email.sent. Now I can do special things inside of here. Maybe I want to store that data inside my database or do something else with it. Each of these events now have the full type signature that you can then process the data you know you will get back. Now, there's a lot you can do with these webhooks, whether it's forwarding emails or downloading their attachments and a bunch of that around contacts as well, like keeping your database in sync. If you want to make sure that you get all your Resend data into your own database, we've tried to make that extra easy. We just released a webhooks ingester that allows you to basically have a one-click deploy to grab all your data and store it in your own database every time anything happens using webhooks. We build in retry logic, item potency, and a bunch of other things that you would need to do in a production-grade setup. But I hope this makes sense, like how to use webhooks themselves and also how to verify them with Resend. Well, thanks so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Happy emailing.